Wine is one of our oldest traditions, but for the Roman Empire, it was also a standard piece of imperial infrastructure. They took a localized agricultural practice and integrated it into the structural plumbing of their state. Roman leaders used the vineyard as a tether. Wherever the legions marched, they planted vines, using wine as a deliberate tool to connect newly conquered territories to the cultural identity of Rome. This expansion required a massive logistical network. Roman roads and military outposts functioned as an artificial support system for the grapes, forcing a Mediterranean plant to take root in northern climates where it could never have survived on its own. In the ancient world, the widespread existence of wine was not a natural occurrence. It was a product of the brute force and stability of a massive empire. When the empire eventually fractured, that support system vanished. The roads fell into disrepair, the trade hubs emptied, and the artificial demand that kept northern vineyards profitable disappeared. This created an immediate geographic crisis. Without Roman intervention, the freezing winters of northern Europe were far too harsh for unprotected grapevines. The climate began to reclaim the land. Vineyards across the north were abandoned to the frost. For the next 200 years, the region's wine culture effectively died out, replaced entirely by the production of beer and water. Without the empire's protection, a tradition thousands of years old was on the verge of being erased by the geography of the Dark Ages. As the Roman machine vanished, the responsibility for the vine shifted to the Benedictine monks. They lived in isolation in remote stone abbeys, far from the politics of the fallen empire. Their interest in viticulture wasn't commercial, it was a requirement of their faith. Catholic communion strictly requires real wine to represent the blood of Christ. This created a survival crisis for the church. Without wine, there could be no communion. Without communion, their religious services were considered invalid. The very existence of their faith depended on a steady supply of grapes. This unyielding mandate forced these isolated monks to attempt what earlier farmers had deemed impossible, keeping the vines alive in a frozen landscape. To survive the cold, the monks abandoned traditional farming and adopted a rigorous experimental methodology. They treated the soil as a laboratory, working the rocky earth with obsessive attention to detail. They began compiling exhaustive written records. They tracked soil composition and logged unpredictable weather patterns, creating a centuries-long database of how the northern environment behaved. They mapped the movement of the sun across the hills. They mathematically calculated which specific slopes received the longest duration of light, seeking out every possible advantage the landscape could offer. This data allowed them to engineer a microclimate methodology. By identifying hyper-specific pockets of heat, they successfully kept Mediterranean vines alive in the freezing north. The dogmatic pursuit of a religious requirement accidentally birthed a modern, data-driven scientific method of agriculture. We see the result of this scientific mindset in the 1660s with the monk Dom Perignon. He was working in the hills of Champagne, a region defined by its punishingly early winters. One year, an early freeze stopped the fermentation in his cellar prematurely. When spring arrived and the weather warmed, the yeast woke back up inside the sealed bottles, restarting the process and creating an intense buildup of carbon dioxide. The pressure became so great that the glass bottles began to explode in sequence, acting like small bombs in the cellar. Rather than viewing this as a failure, Perignon used his monastic training to study the pressure. He learned to control the carbonation through experimentation with glass and seals, eventually refining these ruined bottles into the sparkling wine we know today. The monks did more than just keep the vines alive. Their centuries of data collection defined the maps we use today. The borders of the world's most prestigious wine regions overlap perfectly with the sites of these ancient monastic laboratories. We see a contrast in how traditions survive. Rome built a massive infrastructure through force, yet that system crumbled the moment the central authority failed. The preservation of human culture is often achieved not by the expansion of empires, but by the slow, quiet, and meticulous patience of those doing ordinary work. Consider the physical glass of wine you might hold today. It is more than just a commercial product. That liquid represents centuries of weather logs, soil experiments, and the physical effort required to keep a Mediterranean plant alive in a northern winter. It is the result of a continuous effort to document and understand the land. Every sip is the outcome of a 2,000-year journey, a living record saved from the Dark Ages by a few quiet people who believed it was worth the effort to keep it alive.